Please leave a comment where in the world you are listening from. He seemed normal enough at first, but said he didn't like my name, so made up the name Gwen for me, then decided that I looked like the actress Lauren Bacall to him, so started calling me Lauren. For some reason I didn't think it was a big deal. I guess this was because it was before I learned what toxic relationships are. He even referred to me as Lauren to his family and friends. As time went on, I confronted him about it and told him I thought it was weird and creepy and that it seemed controlling in a way. I told him that I thought that it was really wrong that he was seemingly trying to strip me of my identity. I've never heard of that level of abuse before. He said again, he didn't like my real name, so for some reason I dropped it. It got worse as time went on. I couldn't even go to the grocery store for an hour without him blowing up my phone wanting to know where I was, even though he knew I went to the store. He would claim that he was just worried about me and was checking on me to make sure I was okay. I brushed it off, but I think deep down I knew that he was being controlling. I once told him that I was spending the night at a friend's house because it got late when we were hanging out, and he said that he was fine with it. I don't care if he was or not. It was just common courtesy to call to let him know I wasn't going to be home that night. Even though he said he was okay with it and that he would see me in the morning, when I woke up the next morning, I had 13 different voicemails from him. Each one was progressively angrier. He said that he once again was worried about me because he hadn't heard from me. That was it for me. I ended the relationship, but I have never heard of the level of abuse where somebody will call you by a different name. Again, it seemed like not only did he think he owned me, but that he was trying to strip me of my very identity. Has anyone else ever encountered this? Thanks for reading, because I know that it's not like the other stories on here, but something just got me thinking about it tonight, and I wanted to know if anyone else has ever encountered someone like this. Thanks. I then found out that cults actually do this and give a different name to someone. This makes a lot of sense because he seemed to have these delusions that he was going to prove Christianity to be false. I don't subscribe to Christianity, and I actually rejected it a long time ago, but I'm not going to go out of my way to convince a Christian that they're wrong. I'm just going to let them believe what they want, but the stuff he was doing was way out there. He had these delusions that he was going to change the world and become this really powerful person. He kept claiming that he didn't want fame or anything like that, but it was clear that he thought he was a lot more intelligent than he actually was, and that that's exactly what he was trying to achieve. He actually wrote President Carter and had himself convinced that he was going to be invited to his house. He called it studying. He claimed to be Jewish, but it was just a level I've never seen before. Like he devoted hours a day to this. He would send me these really bizarre poems and emails, a lot of which I still have to show them how messed up in the head he is in case he ever gets arrested for abusing someone else, so that I can try to help his next victim. He seemed to be very narcissistic to me, because the delusions of grandeur were very apparent to me. He definitely seemed mentally unstable and actually dangerous. I don't know if you saw my other comment, but there were a few things that he said that made me think he was dangerous. He had a bad landlord before, and said that it made him feel good to hate this guy. I tried telling him to just let it go because he wasn't living there anymore, and he was like, no, I will never forgive him for what he did to me. It makes me feel good to hate him. All he was doing was raising the rent. Sure, it sucks, but you don't carry on hating somebody over something that's stupid, especially when they're not your landlord anymore. Also, one day I was in the car with him, and somebody cut him off, which again sucks, but he way overreacted. He said I could drive up behind that person and shoot them in the head without a second thought. It also makes sense because several times he tried to convert me, and I finally told him, look, I am not interested in what you have to say, and nothing you can say is going to convince me to convert. He said you should be ashamed of yourself. What if it was something really profound, and it changed your mind? I said nothing is going to change my mind. I feel the way I feel about organized religion, and that's it. He would become irrationally angry with anyone who challenged his beliefs or disagreed with him, though he claimed to not be emotionally invested in being right. He was just a really bizarre and eccentric person, and I'm glad that he's out of my life. One more thing. Again, the cult thing makes sense to me because with the delusions of grandeur, it makes me think that he was probably trying to start his own cult. Thanks for your insightful comment. Unlucky for him. I am too headstrong and too strong in general to be fooled by brainwashing. I think that's what pissed him off about me the most. The fact that he knew that I was not about to let him control me and brainwash me. It pisses off abusers when they realize that their tactics are not working, and I think that's what his problem with me was. Again, I'm just glad he's out of my life, and I don't have to deal with him anymore. It's not surprising to me that his son wanted nothing to do with him basically, and that he didn't get along with his brother. Everything makes sense now. I remember we lived in an apartment building, and the neighbors would scatter whenever they saw him coming, because they knew that he was going to try to push his beliefs down their throat again. They found it very annoying, and would complain to me when I saw me. Several people asked me why I was with him, and told me about times that they had seen before he met me, where they said he was just weird, and they thought I should get away from him. Whenever Jehovah's Witnesses would come to the door, instead of turning them away politely like most normal people, or just pretending that they weren't home, he would open up the door and try to debate with them. He would try to get them to convert to his side, and anytime anyone told him that they weren't interested in what he had to say, he would disregard that and try to get them to listen anyway. Most normal people stop when told that the listener isn't interested in what they have to say, especially when it comes to religion or politics, but not him. He would just keep on. Sometimes I have seen where he would get angry with people even in public for not listening to him. He was just really weird, and I'm glad again that I'm not with him anymore. I honestly think that if I had stayed with him, he probably would have killed me eventually. He's definitely mentally unstable and needs to be in the hospital, in my opinion. This happened about 15 years ago. At the time, I was dating around, and I had a few creepy encounters during that time, but this guy takes the cake. He was an acquaintance my brother had met at a bar a few times and was showing around the local area because he was new to the country. My brother set us up because he was apparently desperate for a girlfriend, and I guess I was pretty desperate too, because we went on a date together. That date was probably the worst first date I've ever been on. I showed up to the restaurant we were meeting at. He was late, which isn't a huge deal, so I let it slip and we went to sit down. To be honest, I knew from the start I wasn't really attracted to him, but I thought I would be polite and see if we had a nice night. He started off politely too. He held the door for me, pulled my seat out. It wasn't really necessary, but it was nice anyway. Then, when we were sitting down waiting for someone to come and take our orders, I was reading the menu, and he started talking about how much his fiancée would have liked this place. That took me by surprise, and naturally I asked about his fiancée. He revealed that he had had a fiancée before moving over her, but he had just left her to move to another country. I asked why they had broken up, and he said they never really broke up as such, but he got fed up of her nagging him about various things and just moved away. I really didn't know what to say after that, so I changed the subject and started asking him more about himself and where he used to live. He wasn't really very forthcoming. Eventually, our waiter turned up and started talking to us. To clarify for the next part, our waiter was a man of color, and he had an unusual accent for our area. So my date stares blankly at him for a while, then turns to me and says, "You understand this guy?" I said that yes, I could understand him before telling him our orders. After he left, my lovely date continued to shock me. He said, "I wouldn't normally leave ordering to the lady, but that brown guy talked really weirdly, and I didn't get it." Wow, way to tell me you're a racist and a sexist in one breath, dude. Again, I was speechless for a few moments before I got angry with him. I don't remember exactly what I said. It was something along the lines of, "Well, I'm not a lady, so I can order for myself just fine, thanks. And why make racial remarks?" Then he got annoyed with me and told me he wasn't being racist. He just wasn't used to that kind of person where he was from. I pointed out that he wouldn't have met me if he just stuck to people he was used to in his own country. He did calm down then and told me he wouldn't want that because he's glad he met me. Honestly, I found that a little weird, given that I didn't see any way to say that this date was going well and he didn't know me very well at all. But I decided since we had ordered, I should stay, get my meal, and try to redeem the evening before I leave and never see this man ever again. So I answered some of his questions about me, basic getting to know me and small talk stuff for the most part, then started on about my previous dates, if I was a virgin, whether I would be willing to wait until marriage, and then be submissive to my husband or not. It was at this point I realized that I was most likely on a date with a religious bigot, hence the misogyny, weird attitude to sexual stuff, and all his other closed-minded bullshit. So I settled for a none of your business, now I need to leave. I checked the prices on the menu and left money for my half of the food, plus a tip, on the table, and got up to leave. He said he didn't see why I was being unreasonable with him, as though this had been a normal date, but then told me that I couldn't expect him to take my money, because that was an insult to him. Fine, dude, you want to pay for a meal that's not getting eaten, you pay for it. I'm not that mad about spending my money that I'll stop you. So I took my money back and walked straight out. I just assumed that, yes, it was an awful evening, but I wouldn't have to see him again. I wasn't even back to my house when my brother started texting me, asking where I was because my date had called him in tears saying I had gone off for no reason, and he didn't know where I was or what to do. Thankfully, my brother was pretty calm about it and assumed that I had left for a reason. I explained everything to him, and he was pretty surprised too. After that night, we both tried to cut contact. My brother stopped meeting up with the guy, and we both blocked the Facebook account we had for him too. My brother also blocked his number because he would not stop texting him asking about me, alternating between being really worried about me to saying he hoped I dropped dead. Then he started making endless different accounts on social media to harass us. He told my brother he didn't know why we weren't talking to him. He posted a bunch of weird posts describing me in detail before going on to call me a lot of horrible names. We kept blocking them and moving on. Then the harassment got worse. He either found me and followed me at some point, or got my address from a friend and turned up one day, standing around outside my house, asking to come in and speak to me. When I refused to let him in, he grabbed my arm to prevent me from going in either, and started to tell me that he didn't want to let me go because I would never find a man who would love me like he did, and that if I walked away from him again, I would regret it one day when I was old and lonely. He went on and on like this for ages and ages while I tried to pull my arm away from him, before I got fed up of this and yelled at him to get off me and leave me alone, then kicked him in the shin. He let go of my arm but cursed at me and said I was being ungrateful to him, but I took my opportunity to run inside and lock my door. He started banging on my door, then trying to push it inwards. I was getting both upset by this man and just super fed up of his presence in my life, so I grabbed my phone and called the police, telling them that someone was trying to get into my house. I was told someone would be with me soon, but 20 to 30 minutes later there was no sign of them anywhere, and I was getting quite upset because this man was forcing my door, and I thought the lock was going to break soon. So I called my brother, who lives nearby, just because I knew he would come, even though I wasn't sure if he would be able to help much. About 15 minutes later, my brother turns up, and after a brief conversation I didn't quite hear outside, the pressure was gone off the door. I waited a few minutes and then texted my brother to see what was going on, and if it would be alright to look outside now. He didn't reply, and the next thing I heard was the police turning up. I went out to see what was going on. Apparently after my initial call, they had received another call from a neighbor, saying there were two men fighting on my lawn. I guess this was my brother and the guy, since my brother looked out of breath and pretty shook up, and the guy wasn't around anymore. My brother explained to the police that he had tried to stop the man getting into my house, and then the man had hit him. I told my side of the story, and some of my other neighbors were asked what they had seen, and were able to tell them about his attempts to get in. Plus there were marks on the outer side of the door where he had tried repeatedly to get in. The police went to look for him, and a few weeks afterward I was called and told they thought they had found him, but when they wanted me to look at the suspected person, it wasn't the same man. I didn't hear anything else, and I don't know what happened to him. I didn't see him again, and so I'm probably safe after 15 years. Regardless, I don't ever want to see him again. About 3 years ago, my group of friends decided to go on a holiday weekend trip to the hometown of one of the girls, as her family had a small villa not far away from the urban center. We arrived Friday afternoon and decided the first thing we should do was partying at the disco. We prepared and were ready to go just before 8 p.m. That's when Gigi, our hostess, gave us a warning. Girls, guys, a little something before we go. We are going to the biggest bar in town, which is sometimes frequented by narco dudes. Not to scare you, they don't do anything if you don't bother them, but be careful with who you dance. Especially you Ken, our fuckboy friend. Don't go chasing some hitman's girlfriend. Now, who is ready to party? See, Gigi's hometown, which you could say is more of a very little city than a town, is basically the capital of our country's whole eastern region. The area is mostly plains, cattle, and the such, picture American Wild West, and is also home to a lot of drug trafficking routes, plantations, and hideouts because the government has little to no strength in the faraway areas. Drug lord presence is strong, and while they normally keep to themselves, is not uncommon for them or their henchmen be on the town doing their daily activities. Many are not even publicly known as criminals, so no bigger deal there, but for those who are, people and police just look to the other side in fear of what they could do to snitchers. I tell you all of this so that you understand that while Gigi tried to make her warning more user-friendly, she was totally serious about it. Back to the story. We were in the disco having some good time when we lost the protagonist of this tale, Rosa, who by the way gave me permission to post this. Rosa is. Well, she is kind of a hoe. Nothing wrong with it, I love her like that, but God, this girl hormones have gotten her in some spiky situations. The night goes on and Rosa is nowhere to be found, and when it was time to go home, we could not see her. We blasted her phone until she finally sent a message. Girls, I am in this amazing private after party, don't worry. I will be in the house by tomorrow. Zoxo, yes, she writes like that. Gigi's face says it all. The first thing I said. The first and only. We will be lucky if we see her in a week. Why is she so dumb? As Gigi predicted, we wouldn't see Rosa for the rest of the weekend, meaning Saturday, Sunday, and Monday morning. We were worried, but Gigi told us that we should not call the authorities. We needed to wait a little bit more. Obviously, our little vacation was ruined by all this because we were constantly preoccupied. You can imagine our sight of relief when Rosa finally contacted us. Just before we returned to our city, she called to say she was waiting in the downtown. I'm going to skip our reunion for a little while, so that I can jump to what Rosa told us happened in her absence. In the disco, she met a handsome guy that called himself Diego, 190M, big muscles, great dancer, a girl's dream in summary, who after an hour of dancing and making out, offered to take her to a private party in a villa with some of his friends. I don't know if she was very drunk or very smitten, but she said yes. She went outside with him, where they met with a group of 14 girls, all gorgeous according to her description, and a bunch of guys, some as sexy as Diego and others just plain scary that looked like badly disguised soldiers. Diego made a call, and in no time 5 SUV came and picked them all. After a 40-minute ride, she found herself in what SE described as a literal mansion in the middle of nowhere. They were welcomed by a good-looking woman that could be in her late 40s who guided them inside. Rosa says that in the house were other girls and a few guys, but it was obvious that the main guests were 7 older men who everyone obeyed. They were drinking, sniffing cocaine, making out with the ladies and even some of the guys, including Diego, much to Rosa's chagrin, and invited the recently arrived to join them. My friend's memory becomes blurry after this first impression, but in summary she had 2 full days of pool partying, alcohol, drugs, and even orgies. The men gave them designer clothes and bath suits so they could model for them. Occasionally they would be gifted jewels, purses, cash, and the likes, etc. Whatever they wanted, they got it, as long as they made the 7 hosts happy, which meant mostly sexual favors. By Monday morning, the 15 nude girls were asked to get ready and meet in the dining room, where the good-looking woman was waiting for them. Rosa believed she was the main coordinator of the event, as she had seen her giving orders to some of the servants that had helped them all weekend. She told them something along the next lines. Well, ladies, didn't you have an amazing weekend? You all have made our very important hosts so happy. As some of you may have noticed, before you arrived, there were already some girls hanging around. They are part of our little organization. We normally throw parties like this for our clients all the time, and that's the less we do, to be honest. Our girls travel the whole world with our patrons. They appear in magazines, have their own houses, cars, and a lot of other amazing things. The gifts you get to take home are only a little taste of what we can offer. If you are interested, please call the number in the card I am giving you right now, and we will arrange everything. But be fast, we have few positions available. They were later escorted to the SUVs, but as they got in, the woman said one last thing in a very somber tone. Oh, and darlings, all of this is extremely private, so I hope you don't start gossiping around. It would be a very inconvenient situation if someone we don't want finds about it. After another 40-minute ride, Rosa reunited with us, still with hangover, and told us about her adventure. When we found her, she was wearing a green dress, brown leather boots, gold earrings with matching bracelets and collar, and a black purse we had never seen before. Inside were other 3 pairs of earrings, 2 rings, a pearl collar, and a brand new iPhone X, along with some other clothes and her own phone. We later checked all the things online to see the price. A total of $4,000 to $4,500 in designer clothes and jewelry, without counting the new cell phone. Till this day, I don't know if Rosa ever considered calling the number, but we all saw her ripping the card away after our items research. She told us she was happy with her good luck and that nothing bad had happened to her, but she didn't want to risk it in another round with this organization. This happened about 5 years ago, and I have never had the chance to tell many people about the level of crazy that happened that evening. I met the guy on a dating app, of course, and we chatted a few days on text. I was getting very normal vibes from the conversations, so I agreed to meet up. His profile had him living in the town next to mine. We set the date and time at a local bar/restaurant, and it was only about 5 to 10 minutes from my home. I was getting into the car, and he texted me to tell me he was running late because he was driving home from Pittsburgh. Now that is at least a 5-hour drive from where I live. At any point in this entire time frame, do you think he could have mentioned it earlier in that 5 hours he was likely driving? So he said he needed to push it back, and I agreed. Red flag number 1. I got to the bar at the time we moved it back to, and he was not there yet. I get a text telling me he was 15 minutes away, and to order him a drink. Order and pay for your drink. Red flag number 2. I was chatting with a couple next to me at the bar, and I had already decided to finish my drink and then leave. I did not order his drink, by the way, and all of a sudden he shows up. He was reeking of cigarette smoke when I had put no smokers on my profile. Red flag number 3. But figured he was there and at least see what happens. He wanted to move to a more quiet area of the bar, so we moved to the other side, no big deal. He is acting really erratic, and then said we should dance. No one is dancing, so no. He put his hand on my head and pulled my bangs back and said, I just want to see your whole face. Okay dude, get off of me. Red flag number 4. Some friends/co-workers of mine showed up and went to sit on the other side of the bar. I introduced them and figured that was it. This psycho kept asking me for cigarettes that I did not have, kept bumming them off people as he went outside, and I knew I was done. I actually knew it at the beginning of the night, but was already there. I asked for the bar tab, and it was $80, but decided to suck it up and pay it myself while he was outside, and then try to leave. I know the bartenders and figured the guy would stiff them, so I did not want to leave without paying. I went over to my friends to say goodnight, and one was pretty drunk and asked me to drop him off at home, since it was literally right on my way anyway. I agreed and we started to head out. Psycho dude comes in just in time to see me leaving and asked what was going on. I told him I was leaving and giving a coworker a ride home. It was a male coworker and I am female. He looked at me like I killed his puppy and walked right back out the door of the smoking area side of the bar. Red flag number 1,000,000 at this point. The bartenders and manager had been watching his interactions all night and told us they were going to escort us to my car. So we get in the car and drive the coworker home. On the way, I am blasted by calls and texts from Psycho Dude telling me I need to drive him home and to come back. I'm like, WTF? However you got there, you can use that to get home or call an Uber. He kept texting, so I blocked him. I woke up in the morning and curiously looked at blocked texts, and I had one that was sent around 9 a.m. that said, Hello beautiful, had a great time and you give nice hugs. I am not sure what was wrong with him, but holy hell. Of course I never spoke to him again. I was smoking with this guy I had just met. He seemed cool enough at first, casual, laid-back vibes. He picked me up, and we started cruising around. He handed me the blunt, and I didn't think much of it. I took a few hits, but something fell off pretty quickly. I noticed he wasn't really smoking it himself, which should have been my first red flag. Instead, I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was pacing himself. We stopped at a Wawa so he could get gas, and while he was at it, he offered to grab me a drink. I declined, not feeling particularly thirsty, and honestly just trying to stay chill since the high was already hitting differently than usual. At that point, I didn't know what was coming. I just had this weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. Not long after we left Wawa, he pulled over in a random spot, and another guy walked up to the driver's side window. He introduced him as his cousin, and said his cousin wanted to hang out with us. Then, he casually invited me to go back to his place to chill with the both of them. Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. I knew something wasn't right. The vibe felt shady, and I didn't like the way they were both looking at me, too casual, too rehearsed. I said no thank you, and asked him to just take me home. He didn't argue, didn't try to push it, just agreed and drove me back like it was no big deal. That, in itself, threw me off. I couldn't decide if he was genuinely harmless, or just decided last minute not to go through with whatever plan they had cooked up. It wasn't until I got home that things really went south. Almost as soon as I sat down, I realized I could barely move. My entire body felt heavy, my head was spinning, and I couldn't even focus enough to string my thoughts together. I was completely out of it. Someone had to take care of me, because I was too messed up to function. It hit me then, the weed was definitely laced. I started replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out what exactly had happened. It wasn't just a bad high, it was something more sinister. They clearly had plans for me, and whether it was to rob me, hurt me, or worse, I'll never know. The only thing I do know is that I got lucky. For whatever reason, he decided not to go through with it and just took me home. I never confronted him about it. I didn't see the point. What would I even say? Hey, remember that time you tried to drug me? It didn't feel worth it, especially since I never wanted to hear from him again. I blocked him immediately and tried to put the whole experience behind me. But of course, life has a funny way of circling back to you. About 2 years later, out of nowhere, I get this random message on my PS4. It's him. He says he moved to my area and casually tries to start up a conversation like nothing had ever happened. Bruh. I just sat there staring at the screen, equal parts stunned and disgusted. How did he even find me on there? And what made him think I'd want to talk to him after all that? I didn't reply. I just blocked him again and moved on. About 5 or so years ago, I was 23 at the time and had just gotten out of my first and only serious relationship a year prior. That guy was my first love and my first sexual experience, and so needless to say, when things ended, and he had zero interest in trying to work things out, I was heartbroken. After about a year of moping and being stupidly sexually promiscuous, I decided to try actual dating. I met this guy Rick on a dating website. He was a couple of years older than me, was an ex-Marine, was cute, and good at making conversation. After a few days of talking online, he asked for my number, and we decided to meet up. I drove to his house, and come to find out he lived with a few other guys who looked really shady. Now he actually lived in a good neighborhood, but the way they kept their home and the way his roommates looked was my first red flag that an inexperienced, naive girl would not fit in his crowd, but I decided to stay and give it a chance. Once he saw me, he came up, gave me a hug, and handed me a helmet. To his motorcycle. Now I have never in my life rode a motorcycle before, but I had always wanted to, so I thought why not and hopped on. Now the street he decides to take me up is known to be a very long and windy road that is pretty secluded. It's also important to note that this is the springtime, and it's about 5 p.m. when we go on our ride. I didn't realize at the time he had decided to take me on that specific road, but once we got on it, my red flags started to kick in. I began to realize that 1, it is dead silent and there are no other cars on this road right now. 2, it's starting to get dark, and 3, yeah, I don't know this guy, so what the hell am I doing? And my alarm bells start ringing. Now I will say that while I made a ton of mistakes within this story, this instance is where I am proud of how I reacted. Once my anxiety kicked in, I told him that I think we should turn around and go home. He started laughing and asked if I was scared, and I said no, I just need to head home because my parents are expecting me for dinner soon. He kept riding forward. More alarm bells ringing. Pictures of me being raped and lying dead in a ditch came up. I kept asking him, can we please turn back, can we please turn back, and he finally gave in and turned around. The next day comes, and I told myself that maybe I was just overreacting, and he was harmless, and decided to agree on a second date a few days later. We met up at a sports bar for dinner and a couple of beers, so we can watch the hockey game. The entire time we are sitting there, Rick has his arm around me and has me literally attached to his hip, constantly trying to make out with me, and is acting extremely possessive. At this point I'm completely freaked out because I barely know this guy, and all he is talking to me is about our future, and how he would be such a protective boyfriend because he was an ex-Marine. At this point I knew I was done with him, but unfortunately my car is at his house. When we are done and head home, he insists that I come inside and hang out for a bit. I decide to walk in and stay for 5 minutes. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. We walk into his room, and he immediately pounces on me, making out with me and trying to feel me up. I kept pushing his hands away and kept telling him that I needed to get going, but I could tell he wasn't going to give up until he got what he wanted, especially after I realized his little friend was aroused. He told me that he would not let me leave until we did something. I had no idea what he would have forced me to do if I kept rejecting his advances, so I decided that my only way out of there was to finish him off. So I did, and the entire time I'm trying to act like I'm enjoying it while dying inside and hoping he would hurry up and finish so I can quickly leave. Luckily I only used my hands, and luckily it took him a few minutes to finish before I literally ran out that door and sped home. After that night, he tried to ask me to hang out again, and I told him that I think it would be best if we stayed friends. This guy began to relentlessly call me and text me and beg me to see him, then proceeded to call me a bitch because I was ignoring him, then would apologize for calling me a bitch, and it was because he liked me so much. So I blocked him. Then he tried to message me on Instagram. So I blocked him there, and then on Facebook, and finally on Snapchat. This is a story about a time when I found out I was more naive than I thought I was. I think we all have a few stories like this from when we were young. I'm a female, and when I was in my 20s I dropped out of college and worked at a call center for a few years before finishing my degree. The place I worked paid a lot higher than most call center work, so it had relatively low turnover, and people stayed there for a long time and developed friendships with their coworkers. I became friends with a guy whose desk was next to mine because we worked the same shift. I'll call him Brad. Brad was 7 or 8 years older than me and was married with a daughter. We hit it off right away because we were both cynical and sarcastic, and we often thought we were the most sophisticated people in our call center, believing many of our co-workers to be rubes and goody two-shoes. I am so glad I have since grown out of that immature way of thinking. We started hanging out sometimes after work, going out for beers. Brad lived in the next city over, which was about 30 miles away. Traffic was always terrible going back to his town in the evening, so sometimes he'd want to chill and blow off some steam while letting the traffic thin out. I was still at the stage where drinking in a bar was a novelty, so I was happy to get after-work beers. I was never attracted to Brad. To my mind, we were nothing more than work buddies. He was married with a kid, and I'm not attracted to cheaters. Even if Brad hadn't been married, his personality would have prevented me from being attracted to him, because he could be really annoying. Brad was really pushy with his opinions. He was always trying to force books, CDs, and DVDs on me. It was the early 2000s, and then would pester me relentlessly afterward asking how I liked it. He was always really insistent that I agree that whatever he recommended was better than stuff I liked. This may not sound like much, but it was super annoying and totally invalidating. We didn't have the same taste, so I never liked the stuff he recommended. I quit accepting things from him after about the second time, but he would still try to force books and things on me, and he'd pout when I told him I wasn't interested in taking them. The only other time I've had people do this was when I was dating them, and I didn't like it then either. I eventually got fired for clocking in 1 minute late from lunch or breaking another of the pointlessly draconian call center rules. Brad took me out for beers the day I got fired, and I fully expected to never see him or any of my other call center co-workers again. A few weeks later, however, Brad texted me on a Saturday night to say he'd been out with friends in my town, and did I want to meet up for beers? I told him no, that I was in for the night. He texted me back that he'd just bought a 6-pack and was headed to my house. He knocked on my door about a minute later. I'm definitely not the type of person who appreciates unexpected visitors. I cursed the fact that I'd invited Brad to a party a few weeks earlier and given him my address. I couldn't see any way out of it, so I let him in and drank a few beers while he prattled on about various co-workers that I was no longer interested in. When I started getting tired at about 10:30 and asked Brad to leave, he started pouting and whining that it was too early and he didn't want to go home yet. I basically had to push him out the door. I ghosted Brad after that. I would get texts periodically on Saturday nights that just said, "You home?" or worse, "I did a drive-by and it looks like your car is gone. You out? Want to meet up?" He even knocked on my door a few times when I was home, to which I hid until he was gone. He never did this stuff when we worked together. I didn't know why he was so interested now. I don't know why he was so presumptuous in thinking that showing up at my house was okay, other than that I was single and he assumed I wanted company. A year and a half after I'd quit working with Brad, I ran into him downtown. I'd been having lunch with friends and was walking back to my car when I spotted him sitting outside a cafe by himself. He waved me over, and I ended up having a cup of coffee with him. He whined at me about ghosting him, and because I was so young and didn't know any better, the guilt trip worked. He talked me into letting him come over later with beers for a low-key hangout. Brad showed up later that evening with a 6-pack and some crappy book that his friend had written that he said I just had to read. From the minute he got there, all he wanted to talk about was these co-workers at the call center who had had an affair and left their spouses for each other. This was the hot gossip I was missing out on since I no longer worked there. I honestly didn't care, because I no longer worked there. But Brad wouldn't shut up about it. He analyzed it in great detail, speculating about all the different aspects of their relationship and how it affected their kids and their exes and all kinds of things that were none of my concern. I regretted letting him invite himself over. Somehow the word orgasm came up in our conversation. Brad took that opportunity to say, "Opie, when was the last time you had an orgasm that was given to you by someone else?" All of the air went out of the room. Now I understood why he wanted to come over to my house so badly. For some reason, I'd thought he wasn't that kind of person. Stupid me. You need to leave, I said. I fucked up, he replied. I didn't mean anything by it. I was just wondering. You need to leave, I repeated. Ah, you're not really mad, are you? He asked with a surprised look on his face. I walked to the front door and opened it. Leave now. Don't call me, don't text me, don't show up here with beers. Get out! He continued to stare at me incredulously. Wow, you're actually mad? I just glared back at him. He shrugged and set his beer down. Okay, boss. He walked slowly to the door, still with a disbelieving look on his face. Once he got over the threshold, he turned to look at me again and started to say something else. I shut the door in his face. He immediately called and left me a long voicemail which I didn't listen to, and continued on with periodic texts and voicemails in the following weeks, as well as an invitation to a Halloween party he and his wife were throwing. I would have blocked him, but this was before you could easily do that. I never spoke to him again, and when he later tried to friend me on social media, I blocked him. I know this isn't creepy in the same way being followed home by a stranger is creepy, and Brad didn't get aggressive and left when I asked him to, but it could have gone differently. He was in my house and nobody knew he was there. He'd invited himself over and showed up at my house for months even though I'd ignored him. He didn't respect my boundaries when I asked him to stop contacting me, and I'm not a flirty person. I didn't lead him on or make him think I was interested in him other than having conversations about books and movies and stuff. I thought we were friends, and he thought we were going to have an affair. I hope his wife left his dumb ass. My co-worker, I will call her Jane, is 33 years old, a virgin, and a very devout Christian. Her family is very strict and very religious. I'm not bashing on the religion in any way. I was raised a Christian myself. These people, though, they just seem to take their beliefs to a new extreme. Think of them as the Flanders from The Simpsons. I mentioned that Jane is a virgin because she has honestly never even had a boyfriend before. She's been on a few dating websites as of late, but she's usually very strict when it comes to the types of guys she would date. She can be kind of stuck up, which has gained her very little popularity. She recently meets a guy on OkCupid. Let's call him Miguel. Miguel claims to live in a bigger city than ours, an hour away. We are in the middle of nowhere in Kansas. And that he is 35 years old, also claims to be a virgin, and takes an interest in Jane. They chat for a while, and she's very excited. Once they establish a fondness for each other, he claims that he has a $250,000 in savings and a job at Cessna that pays $65 an hour. He has a nice apartment and 2 cars, one of which is a '69 Dodge Charger. Sounds too good to be true, right? We all agree. Everyone but her. They agree to meet for a first date, and he says he'll drive down here to see her. While driving down here, he claims to get into an accident on the interstate and is left hospitalized. Jane is devastated. The rest of us, who she was telling this to, all just assumed that he was lying to her, and this was his way of getting out of the date and her finding out that he was scum. We didn't think there'd be any more communication afterwards. We were wrong. They continued talking, and shortly after getting out of the hospital, he claimed he was hit by a car crossing the street. His life apparently took a turn for the worst, as he claimed he was laid off from Cessna, his apartment was burglarized, and all of his money and his other car were seized by the IRS due to a misunderstanding in his taxes from a few years back. Completely believable stories, right? Much to our dismay, Jane decides she doesn't care about these things, and she is willing to continue talking to the man. He soon starts calling her daily, and coming over once a week to visit her at work. At this point, we get to meet this guy, and he comes off as your typical loser with a beer belly who lays around on the couch all day, yelling at his woman to bring him a beer. Despite all of the money he claims to have, he wears clothes that are way too big for him, usually sweatpants and flip-flops. This earned him the nickname Flip-Flops amongst us at work. He has problems making eye contact with people when he talks to them, and has the creepiest smile. We know right away that he doesn't seem very trustworthy. 3 weeks into their relationship, he shows up at our work and proposes to Jane. She gladly agrees, as we all shake our heads in disbelief. He tells us he got a new job working for Microsoft down in his city. We did our research. There is no Microsoft jobs over there, unless you're working and selling products at Best Buy. And he tells her that he's now seeing a therapist for his anger and jealousy issues. Many red flags are going off in our heads at this point, but Jane doesn't seem to mind any of it. He moves down here to be with her, After claiming that his family disowned him for wanting to marry a Christian, he claims they're all devout Catholics. And that's the reason why she'll never get to meet them. As if this isn't ridiculous and over the top enough, things start to get creepier from here. He tells us that he has a new job for $25 an hour as the head engineer at Exide Manufacturing. The head of HR at Exide is actually a relative of a friend of ours, so we asked her about this. They never heard of this man, and the position he claims he has doesn't exist. We try to tell Jane about it, but she brushes off all of our comments and claims that we are thinking too much about it, or we're just jealous. He starts picking her up and dropping her off from work every single day, as well as picking her up for all of her lunches. She still believes he has a full-time job, and that he's only doing this because of how much he loves her. We start to feel that he's just wanting to know where she is at all times. He asks the maintenance man at our work, after their first meeting, to be the best man at his wedding. This doesn't strike Jane as odd, because apparently Miguel is just untrusting of most people and has no friends of his own. They all want him for his money. Her parents loan him their spare van, so he can use that to drive from now on. To our shock, her parents are already buying baby clothes and supplies for the couple. They are completely won over by the man. I think they're just blinded by the fact that their daughter finally has someone and will give them grandkids, which is a really sad thought. By this point, we've noticed her personality growing slightly more stressed and depressed as time goes on. Now, if you've read up to this point, you're probably thinking, oh, she's just another dumb girl who picked up a sleazeball guy who's milking her for all she's worth. And you're definitely not wrong. We all thought the same thing, until she one day dropped this little bomb on us. He has just recently told her that he used to be spec ops in the military, the Air Force to be exact, and they've decided that they want him to work for them again. They'll pay him $75K for working 3 days/3 weeks/3 months. The story always changes, something she doesn't find suspicious at all, testing military equipment that's too dangerous and could be life-threatening. He agrees to the work, and we all think he's copping out of the relationship. She then tells us that if she wishes to remain in contact with him, they'll have to get married as soon as possible, and she'll have to be prepared to move away with him. She explains that the military has been calling her and making stops at their house to explain to her that she'll have to marry him immediately, and she needs to be prepared to move to an undisclosed location at any given moment. From that location, she'll not be allowed to make any contact with friends or family, since all that is going on is top secret, and she has to prove that she can be trusted. Obviously, all of us are now alarmed. Everyone but her and her family. They are delighted that she's with a military man, and are proud that she gets to be a part of something much bigger. The rest of us, sane people, are trying to figure out what on earth he can be plotting. Is she going to be hijacked into human trafficking? Is he going to murder her? One of our co-workers has just called the human trafficking hotline, and they think that this definitely sounds like something they've seen before. Unfortunately, they can't do anything about it until he actually makes a move and takes her. We're looking into contacting our local police to see if there's anything that can be done about this, before she gets the phone call that tells her when they have to make their move. This is all so crazy, we don't know what to expect, or just what danger she's really in. Any thoughts would be appreciated, and thank you for reading. Update. The first time I met Miguel, it was on a freight day at work. We all work in a retail store. Jane and the rest of her department had just finished their freight, and they were allowed to go home for the day. I grumbled as I worked in the department next to them, and had to finish my freight by myself. I work right next to the time clock, so I saw Jane clock out. About 10 minutes later, a guy shows up in sweatpants and flip-flops. He smiles creepily at me as he wanders around her department. I continue putting up my freight. He walks up to me and hands me a Pepsi. Can you give this to Jane, please? Oh, sorry dude, she just clocked out for the day. What? His face dropped as he darted to the front door. I shrugged it off and continued working. A few minutes later, he comes back, slightly flustered. Her car is still out there. She's still here. I gave him a funny look and stated that I saw her clock out. He stormed off again. A few more moments later, he returns, furious. Her car is out there. Where is she? I was a bit alarmed. Jane is pretty obese, so I thought to myself it was probably taking her that long to get across the store. Do I need to get a manager on you? Where is Jane? Fortunately for me, my boyfriend showed up at the time. He expected me to get off at the same time as the rest of my co-workers, so he came in trying to find me. Did you say Jane? I just saw her in the parking lot. Flip-Flop stormed out as my BF, and I gave each t'other WTF looks. The next morning, Miguel showed up at work and proposed to Jane in our stockroom as we were unpacking boxes. My BF laughed when I told him this. He wasn't surprised that Jane was dating that Neanderthal. Looking back on it now, I think that the fact that Jane could slip through this guy's grasp and actually do something unnoticed by him freaked him out. He didn't have as much control as he wanted. That might have instigated his proposal, making him want to make sure he had complete control over her. Which is a terrifying thought. Alright guys, boy was this unexpected for me. As some of you in the comments have seen, I initially tried posting this over a month ago. It however kept getting caught in the algorithm of a bot in this forum, and was flagged and immediately taken down. No matter how many times I edited it, apparently it was a wall of text. I finally got it approved a few days ago, and that's why it's up here for you to see now. As you can imagine, a lot has happened over the past month, and that's why I'm here now to let you all know just what has happened since. To those who want the short answer, she is fine now, and the situation is nearly completely resolved. Long answer, keep reading. To answer a few questions, I'll start with, to those of you who guessed Wichita, Kansas, you are mostly correct. Wichita is the city where he's from. Geez, you guys are good. Why not hire a PI? Well, quite frankly, I don't have the kind of money for that. Why don't you and your co-workers all pitch in to get one? Honestly, the majority of my co-workers really don't like Jane. And that's putting it nicely. I know this will sound cruel, but most of them were just counting down the days until they didn't have to see her anymore. She's always had this bad habit of rubbing people the wrong way. Is she a naive girl? Yes. Is she stupid? Also yes. Ever since I've met her, she's always insisted on being the first to give relationship advice, to me and many others, despite having no experience of her own. She's actually the first to throw in her opinion and give advice on most subjects, usually on stuff that she only thinks she knows everything about. She comes off as a know-it-all and is very arrogant. Having done missionary trips in Africa before, she assumes she's seen the worst of humanity, and she's more than knowledgeable of the evil of the world. She also likes to butt into the business of everyone, whether she's welcome or not. A few co-workers have tried setting her up on dates before, and when she comes back from them, she is usually furious and gives a lecture on, "How dare you think he was good enough for me?" I would also like to state that this is not the direct result of her faith and religion, so you guys can stop throwing that as an excuse. It does play a part of it, but most of it is the fault of her own personality, I would say. I'm a Christian also. I was also raised a very sheltered life. I was homeschooled all throughout high school, and everyone I knew was from our church. I didn't have my first date until I was 20, and he became my first boyfriend. He's an agnostic metalhead, and my parents insisted he go to church with us before he could be approved. He showed up in trip pants, spikes and studs, and a shirt that boldly read FUCK. He was nothing but kind to the congregation, and they had to have a type of intervention with me the next day to make us break up. We are still together to this day, and our 7-year anniversary is this Halloween. I'm very capable of making my own decisions, and my number one rule is to not be an asshole. If my religion calls me to be an asshole, I tell it to fuck off. I never try to force it on anyone. My beliefs are for me and me alone. I understand common sense and reasoning, and though I've been through hardships, my life is pretty decent. So no, I will not take Jane's religion or sheltered life as an excuse for her ignorance and lack of common sense. Sorry for talking about me. I was just trying to prove a point. Now, with these bits of info, I will continue on to the story. Around the same time this story was originally posted, I think the same weekend, it turns out that Jane and Miguel had had a secret wedding ceremony at her church, and were now married. Yes, there was a certificate and everything, full-blown legally binding marriage. None of his friends or family was present, only Jane's family and their pastor. She hid it from the rest of us for about a week. During these days of us being in the dark, we noticed a lot of mood shifts with her. One day, she would come in beaming and happy, the world was perfect for her. The next day, we could see the stress and tell something was wrong. A few of us also noted at this same time that both Jane's and Miguel's Facebook accounts had been deleted. He had a recently made account, no pictures of him, just pictures of his nice cars. He rarely used it, and all of his family on the account looked nothing like him. Some of you noticed in the comments that I'd mentioned him being blondish-haired, blue-eyed, and light though dirty-looking skin. He claims he's Spanish, but all of his family was very distinctly Mexican-looking. We were afraid that he wasn't wanting her, usual overly talkative self, to give too much info about their situation, movements, and whereabouts when he kidnapped her. She confided in a co-worker that he had a lot of outbursts, and though he hadn't been violent, he had suddenly become a different person. We tried warning her that he was dangerous, but she assured us that he was just insecure from having been cheated on in so many past relationships, and that it was nothing. It was sad to say she was definitely in an abusive relationship. The saddest part is seeing a situation like this, and knowing that they can only help themselves at this point, when they refuse to listen to everyone else. Jane also had a pet cat that she's had for nearly 8 years to this point. Miguel was always getting angry at the cat, accusing Jane of loving it more than him, etc. Her cat likes to paw at its food bowl when you pour food into it, and one day as he was trying to feed it, she playfully pawed. He went into a rage, stating that the cat was trying to attack him, and as punishment, it should go without food. For days when Jane would come home from work, she would notice her cat getting more depressed, and it would cry a lot more. He would assure Jane that the cat is fine. I fed it twice today, don't feed it or it'll get fat. He was trying to starve and was probably abusing her poor cat, and she didn't see this as a sign to leave the asshole. Shortly after these incidents, Jane wound up incredibly sick and had to get rushed to the ER. She had a high fever, but that is the extent that she told us at work. She didn't return for 3 days. We were terrified that he had tried to poison her, or something, to get rid of her. She didn't find it strange at all that he wasn't at work for the days she was sick at home. It was this time that word made it to our work that they had been married. She came back to work, seemed to be fine. Around this time, Miguel got a phone call from the military, stating that he had to report to Fort Scott for top-secret weapons testing, and shortly after this, they would have to prepare for their big move. I dare you to look up Fort Scott, Kansas, and see if that seems like the kind of place that would do super dangerous top-secret military weapons testing. I couldn't begin to tell you how many lies he's told that could be easily disproven by a simple Google search. She never questioned him about any of this. Unfortunately for him, the family van of hers that he'd been driving had broken down on his way to the test site, and her father had to come bring him home. By pure luck, the military called afterwards and told him that the equipment he was testing had exploded and killed a few men, so he was so lucky to have not turned up that day. They changed his plans, and his next top-secret mission would be next April, and it would be then that he and Jane would get to move. With this said, I would like to point out that I do get along with Jane. I do understand some of where she's coming from, and I don't blame the rest of my co-workers one bit for not liking her. A few of us still agree, though, that as annoying as she can be, and despite how stupid she's being, she still doesn't deserve to be murdered or trafficked or whatever would happen to her. So for those of us that cared, we were glad that we at least had until April to figure out what we could do. To continue from here, I will explain that before they were married, Jane was surprisingly good at keeping to her beliefs. Miguel had to live with another man from Jane's church, and not with her, so as to keep their marriage bed sacred and to not be tempted. Miguel made it abundantly clear to Jane that he hated these arrangements, and would try to start fights whenever it was made clear he wasn't going to get laid anytime soon. A week or so after the van broke down, a letter arrived at the house of the man Miguel had been staying with. It was inquiring about why he had missed the court date for giving away his parental rights back to his wife. Fortunately, this man from the church actually had common sense, so he met up with one of Jane's sisters to discuss what to do. Despite all of her family fully loving and supporting the couple, one of her sisters was actually hesitant and showed some doubts. There's a sign of intelligent life after all. Jane's sister used this information to find Miguel's wife on Facebook and talk to her, while the church man ran a $30 background check on Miguel. A free background check had been run on him before, but nothing suspicious turned up. Surprisingly, this one also turned up nothing. He had to shell out $200 for a real background check that safely showed how much of what Miguel had said about himself was complete bull. Miguel had been married twice up to this point. He had 4 children with his first wife, and they both had given up custody of the kids, who were now living with Miguel's parents. The real reason that Jane was never going to meet his family. He had 1 kid with his most recent wife, and they had just gotten divorced. Their divorce was finalized a few days before Miguel and Jane's wedding. Sadly, this is all of the information that we co-workers were able to find out that turned up in the background check. No one has told us anything else. Jane's sister printed out copies of the marriage certificates, and they got the church together to show them to Jane. They were all able to convince her that Miguel was a lying dirtbag and helped kick him out of the house. He denied all of it until he was hauled away to a psych ward for suicide watch that night. He was released a few days later, after proving himself sane. Jane issued a no-contact order and has cut off all communication with him as she proceeds to get an annulment. Jane was devastated for about a week, but she's mostly over it now. Gee, it's almost as though she was only really in love with the thought of this man's money and valor, and not him himself. And the hardest part of the situation was dealing with the blow to her ego, knowing how stupid she had been. Sadly, this didn't last very long, as she now boldly tells everyone the tale of how strong she is for getting through all of this and how brave she was. She assures everyone that Miguel was a master con artist, and he was able to fool everyone. Her family and church back her up in all of these claims, seeing as they were all fooled too. To this day, I don't think she really learned anything of value from this situation. Just that she likes having everyone pat her on the back and tell her how brave she is. A bunch of years ago, I matched with a guy on Tinder. I was a freshman in college and just got out of a relationship and having fun. I matched with this guy, male 24. We can call him D. He was a little odd, but we had similar interests and went to the same school, so I thought, why not? The red flags started rolling in immediately when I said I would go on a date with him. Of course, the fact that he was much older isn't lost on me as the initial red flag. At this time, I didn't have a car. D offers to pick me up, but tells me that he is not in town, but he would leave his grandmother's funeral early, which was at a minimum 5 hours away, to come and pick me up. He showed up in sweatpants, a wife beater, and flip-flops, which struck me as odd because he said he was coming from a funeral. We hadn't made plans, just to get a bite to eat and hang out. Since he had been out of town, he asked if it was okay if we stopped to pick up his dog. He had left the dog with a friend. I like dogs, so I was like, no problem. It's dark and we pull up to an apartment complex, and he leaves me in the car and come back with a golden retriever. The dog immediately starts growling at me, which had never happened to me before, so I start feeling a little weird. D doesn't say anything about the dog's temperament. Because we have the dog, he wants to drop him off at his house. This feels logical to me, so I agree. When we pull up to D's house, he asks if I want to come in. Not wanting to sit in the car, I do. The moment I walked in, I immediately knew it was the wrong choice. The house is trashed. There's garbage everywhere. Trash bags full along the front entry, bottles and wrappers on the couch, and just general crap everywhere. D lets me know he has a roommate, but that roommate isn't home. I assume this is to imply the mess isn't his. After brushing the trash off the couch, he asks if I want to sit and play chess. I had expressed that I was interested in learning, and he seemed more than happy to help me learn. This too was a mistake. D begins explaining the game to me, and it isn't fun first date explaining. He has gotten very serious and is showing me each piece while telling me what it is, what it does, and how it moves. D then begins questioning me over each piece, which most I get wrong. Every time I get one wrong, he yells at me the correct answer and tells me try again. He got more and more frustrated, and it made me very uncomfortable, so I suggested we pause chess and do something else. D suggests watching a movie, which is fine with me. The idea of us leaving and going to get food seemingly forgotten. D tells me that we can watch movie in his room, and I oblige, but then he explains that he has to put clean sheets on the bed. I had assumed we were moving to his bedroom because it may have been cleaner, but when we go in it's not, and there is no TV in his room. He proceeds to put Iron Man 2 onto his phone to have us watch. We watched about 10 minutes of it before things got sexual. I won't tell you strangers the details, but short story short, we didn't have sex, but other things went down. I will say those things were consensual. After they occurred, I was feel really odd about the whole situation, and told him I didn't want to have sex. D was confused, but didn't push it at first. He said fine, and we watched maybe 5 more minutes of the movie before he said he didn't want to watch the movie and more. He started complaining and asking me why I didn't want to have sex with him, and I simply said I wasn't in the mood anymore. He then began pressuring me to tell him exactly what it was about him that made me feel that way. At this point, we had moved from the bedroom back into the dirty living room. You might be thinking, seems like a perfect time to leave, and I thought so too, but this is where things start to get scary. As if he knows I'm thinking about how I'm leaving, he explodes and begins to scream at me. This is a 6-foot-something man screaming in the face of a 5-foot-nothing young girl. Of course I'm internally freaking out, but I'm trying to make sure I don't piss him off anymore, but also not agreeing to anything. For the next 5 to 10 minutes, D screams at me about why I don't like him, why I don't want him, and continuously asks what's wrong with him and to tell him. I tried to placate him as best as possible, saying the old, "It's not you, it's me," and "No, I don't want to leave." Again, this man is my only ride home, and I'm truthfully not sure exactly where I was. Though I did have my phone and Google Maps, I did not have Uber at the time. D finally calms down when he believes I'm going to stay, then suggests we try playing some video game. I was in full internal freakout mode, trying to make sure I was playing the part of the interested date, because I was terrified that if he felt I wanted to leave he would freak out again. We play this game for a while, then out of nowhere D starts getting upset again. He started yelling about why no one likes him, why no one wants to get to know him, and why no one loves him, saying that he has never had a girlfriend and all his dates have been one-night stands. Again, I placate him with "I don't know. Lots of girls are just snooty like that." At this point I'm saying anything and everything he wants to hear. He even starts crying about how his mother never loved him and telling me very deep, dark things about what his mother has said to him and treated him. After he finally calms down once more, he gets up and goes to the kitchen to fix us some drinks. Now, if you're anyone with a brain, you're thinking absolutely not, which was my exact thought at that moment. I decline his multiple offers for a drink. He asks if instead of alcohol, I wanted water, and of course I declined that too, feigning that I wasn't thirsty. I stayed at his apartment until about 1 a.m., because I was sitting next to him terrified to 1, ask him to take me home 2, say I'd walk home 3, figure out how to get an Uber. I had been trying to download Uber on my phone without him noticing, but then it asks for card information, and that was too hard to do without him noticing. So around 1 a.m. I yawn very loud and say, "Oh wow, it's 1 a.m. My roommate's going to be so worried about me." I laugh as if my roommate would be stupid to worry, and that I hadn't been watching the clock since he picked me up at 9 p.m. then said, "I'm so tired. I should get home soon." Again, I was super scared he would freak out, but he didn't explode. He just looked at the clock and said, yeah, it was late, but I was not taking any chances, so I said, "I have a great idea. If I get to bed soon, I'd love to have breakfast with you on campus." I was hoping my offer convinced him that I was intending to see him again, and it did. He seemed very happy at the prospect of it and jumped up, walking me out of my house and to his car. The drive back was excruciatingly long. The ride was completely silent, neither of us spoke. It was only a 10-minute drive, but I could have sworn he slowed down every time we got to a particularly dark area or underpass. D dropped me off and I smiled and made a good show of being tired, yet excited to see him tomorrow. He offered multiple times to walk me to my door, but I declined every time and said I didn't want to bother him and I'd see him tomorrow. I walked myself to the building, and the moment I got around the corner, I sprinted so fast up the stairs and to my door before he could change his mind and follow me to my door. When I got in my dorm room, I genuinely felt like I had just escaped a serial killer. Even now, writing it makes my heart race a bit. I never met up with him, but he begged me for multiple days after to meet up with him again. He ever asked to pay me $20 an hour to sit near me in the library. I declined, obviously, and only ever saw him once after at the gym on campus. He didn't see me and I left immediately. I've thought about D occasionally since the date and wondered if all those girls he had one-night stands with had the same experience I did. I still sometimes wonder how many girls there were after me. Was dating a guy twice my age who I worked at a grocery store with. He has a side job with a morgue where he picks up bodies on call. He takes them to the morgue and does paperwork, tags them, and puts them in the freezer. I thought what he did was admirable because someone needs to do it, and death is a touchy subject. He made himself out to be a really great person who cares about people and wants to be that guy who can get the hard stuff done in a caring manner. Unfortunately, he turned out to be a creep. The morgue also does funnel services and stuff, so there are little rooms with chairs and such, also an office. One night we were supposed to hang out, and he asked me to meet him at the morgue. This was in the middle of the night, nobody else there. I figured we'd meet up and leave to get food or just talk in his car like usual, but instead he wanted me to come inside. He showed me around the little rooms in the office. It was kinda cool, like being in a horror video game. Then he told me to wait, and he left me in the office. After a few minutes he texted me and told me to come into a room I hadn't been in. It was the room where they get the bodies ready for the freezer and do the paperwork. I didn't know. I went inside and there was a dead body just out in the open in the middle of the room on a gurney. I froze in the doorway because I wasn't expecting it. I felt like I should be upset, but he thought it was funny, and I kind of just played cool. He wanted me to look at it. It was an old lady. I've seen plenty of stuff on the internet, so thought to myself this wasn't as messed up as it was. He finished up, and then took me into the freezer to show me other bodies. There were like 6 in there in body bags, only one other one unzipped. He also showed me the oven where they were cremated. This was all in the middle of the night, no warning on my part, nobody else in the building. I kind of just blocked out the memory for a couple months. Started having other issues with the guy, and ended up telling the story to a friend. Friend helped me realize the situation was fucked. Just thought I'd share here, since I've since still had issues with this dude, and finally have him blocked on everything. Hopefully he leaves me alone.